So,
I think we are ready to start the meeting. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, greetings from Geneva. We are pleased to meet you again since our last meeting in February last year. Let me start off by introducing myself. My name is Dumisani Dladla. I am the head of the ATT Secretariat. We have set up this podium here so that the president of conference, the ATT Secretariat, as well as some of the facilitators and chairs of the ATT subsidiary bodies can broadcast from. However, some of the chairs and facilitators will facilitate their sessions remotely. We would let you know when we are crossing over to them to facilitate their sessions. Before we commence with the proceedings of today, I would like to take this opportunity to inform you of the housekeeping rules that we'll ask you to observe in order for these meetings to proceed smoothly. Rule number 1, please ensure that your camera and microphone are off during the meeting. Secondly, the Secretariat has established a list of speakers for each session. This will be published on the ATT website each morning of the meetings. Thirdly, when the time for open discussion comes, the names of 3 speakers at the time will be read out so that you know when you are next and can be ready to speak. If you are giving a statement on behalf of your government or organization, turn on your camera and microphone on when you are called upon to speak. If you are not on the speakers list and you would want to make a statement, you can indicate this by using the chat function. Please enter the state or the organization that you would want to speak on behalf and indicate that you would want to take the floor. And be ready to unmute yourself when called upon to speak. When the published list of speakers is exhausted, then we may call on persons who have asked for the floor via the chat function if there is time. In some sessions, there are external experts who will be giving presentations. You will have an opportunity to ask them questions directly after their presentations. To do so, please use the chat function and indicate which expert the question is for. So you would write, for example, country X has a question for the expert from the ICRC. That's an example. If a delegate is called on to make a statement and is unable to connect or come online in a timely manner, we will move on to the next speaker, then try to come back to them later. Finally, please be advised that interpretation into all UN languages is available during the meetings. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you will see a button marked interpretation. If you select this, you will have 6 language options. Click on the language you would like to use. If you do not select a language or one language, you will hear all presentations and statements in the language in which they are delivered. And those are the housekeeping rules that will be applicable for the proceedings of today and tomorrow and for the rest of the week. Having concluded the explanation of the housekeeping rules, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce the president of the 7th Conference of States Parties, Ambassador Jiberi of Sierra Leone, to open this meeting. Mr. President, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Thank you. Thank you very much for putting great effort to make this possible today. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me pleasure to welcome all representatives of the ATT states parties, signatory states, other states, civil society, and industry to this first meeting of the virtual ATT meetings planned for this week. This afternoon, I have the very agreeable task of chairing the first ATT meeting organized since March 2020, when the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic began and impacted our lives, our plans, and our work processes. We are encouraged by the number of representatives who have registered to participate in this meeting, albeit virtually and from different geographic locations. I'm optimistic that the planned meetings for the week will enable participants to exchange views and share experiences on the important aspects of ATT universalization and implementation. The 3rd Conference of States Parties held in September 2017 established 3 standing ATT working groups to operate under their respective terms of reference. The 3 working groups are: 1, the Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementation; 2, the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting; and 3, the Working Group on Treaty Universalization. Since the establishment, these 3 working groups have created a platform for continuous discussions and exchange of views on various topics of the treaty, with a view to achieving outcomes that assist states in implementing the treaty at a national level. In the week ahead, the 3 working groups will continue facilitating discussion on priority issues chosen for the CSP7 cycle. As you will be aware, the working groups are ably led by the following states. Number 1, the Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementation is chaired by the Republic of Korea, assisted by 3 facilitators: Spain for Article 6 and 7, South Africa for Article 9, and Serbia for Article 11. Number 2, the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting is co-chaired by Mexico and Romania. Number 3, the Working Group on Treaty Universalization is chaired by Sierra Leone, the CSP7 presidency, that's ourselves, and Argentina, the CSP6 presidency. We thank all these chairs and of these working groups for the dedication they have been putting into this work. The ATT meetings taking place this week, as confirmed in February of this year, form part of the informal process organized to provide all ATT stakeholders with an opportunity to participate in preparations for the forthcoming 7th Conference of States Parties. All documents for the meetings this week were circulated by the ATT Secretariat to the ATT community and posted on ATT websites in all languages of the treaty, i.e. Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. to facilitate exchanges in the planned ATT meetings. To facilitate exchanges in the planned ATT meetings for the week, it gives me pleasure to confirm that all working groups meetings, as well as the informal preparatory meeting on Friday, will have in-section interpretation. In conclusion, I look forward to lively discussions during the working groups meetings, and I also look forward to receiving the working group's progress reports at the CSP7 informal preparatory meeting on Friday. I thank you all for paying attention to me. With these opening remarks concluded, let me now turn to an even more agreeable task, which is to talk about our theme as president for CSP7. On assumption of the CSP7 presidency in August last year, I announced that the core thematic focus of the Sierra Leone presidency in 2021 will be strengthening efforts to eradicate the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons and ensuring efficient stockpile management. The choice of this thematic focus is largely informed by Sierra Leone's own recent experience, as well as the combined experiences of many states across the regions of the world, resulting from, in large part, from inadequate regulation of the international arms trade. We know from the reports of the United Nations Conference on the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons in all these aspects that the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons is one of the most urgent problems of international peace and security. We also know from the UN Secretary General's 2018 agenda for disarmament that small arms and light weapons are key enablers of armed violence and conflict due to their widespread availability, diversion, and ease of use. Small arms and light weapons are violence multipliers. And that's because most present-day conflicts are fought with small arms and light weapons, and are the weapons of choice fought in civil wars, organized crime, gang violence, gender-related violence, transnational organized crime, and terrorism. They are very easy to use, easy to carry, and easy to conceal. They are also, in some cases, very fungible. They are often a factor behind the forced displacement of civilians and massive human rights violations across the world. This is a lived experience of many people across the world. However, we are sure that there is a willingness on the part of the international community to address this concern. We saw evidence of this when the global community meeting in the First Committee of the UN General Assembly at its 75th section adopted the 2020 ATT resolution last year. The resolution contains a preamble paragraph, PP5, on small arms and light weapons, and the first time it includes an operative paragraph, OP9, that expressly, quote, urges states parties and signatory states to prevent and eradicate the illicit trade in conventional arms, including small and light weapons as set out in Articles 6 and 7 of the treaty, and to prevent diversion to unauthorized end users of conventional weapons, inter alia through efforts to improve efficient stockpile management. Through our collective efforts, the ATT's initiatives in this thematic paper are consistent with achieving Sustainable Goal number 16, which promotes peaceful, just, and inclusive societies, and particularly targets 16.4, which sets to significantly reduce illicit arms flows and combat all forms of organized crimes. In the run-up to this meeting, upon my request, the ATT Secretariat circulated a draft working paper of our presidency. The paper sets out what we consider to be areas of the arms trade supply chain that require further attention by states in the context of existing regulatory frameworks. In this regard, the draft working paper proposes a set of outputs that states could pursue in the context of the ATT's work plan. We hope that the proposals contained in the draft working paper can contribute to effective ATT implementation and ultimately reduce human suffering across the world. I trust that delegations have had the opportunity to consider the working paper and can provide feedback on the proposals contained herein. Proposed outputs aim to address illicit trade in small arms and light weapons and strengthen stockpile management and security. Through mapping and better utilization of existing guidance and tools on the subject. Through post-delivery cooperation and compliance with export documentation, including authorized NUs. Through information sharing of an effective and innovative stockpile management programs. And by mandating the working group on effective treaty implementation to identify and compile a list of existing relevant bilateral and multilateral assistance programs to be made available to states seeking such assistance. Our plan for the short to medium term is to firstly listen to all delegations' views and inputs on the draft working paper. Secondly, to revise the working paper with inputs received, and thirdly, to submit the revised working paper to CSP7 for its consideration and adoption. Thank you, Excellencies, delegates. I will now open the floor for your interventions. I have a list of delegations that have pre-signed to speak. I will call delegations in sets of 3. It doesn't mean that if you haven't already pre-signed, you may not sign up to speak today. I mean, we have quite a bit of time to speak. So I'll begin with the first 3 on my list. Number 1 is Burkina Faso. Number 2, Mexico. Number 3, Japan. Excellencies, the floor is open.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Can you hear me? Thank you. Dear brothers, it's a real pleasure for myself and my delegation to see you presiding over our work. Burkina Faso would like to congratulate you for your election to the presidency of the 7th Conference of State Parties on the ATT, and ensures you of the full cooperation in the carrying out of our work. We'd appreciate fully your work for universalization of the treaty, as well as the key theme. The distribution of arms is a major concern for the security of our states, and more particularly those that are confronted with terrorism. Burkina Faso, for some years, is confronted with a difficult security situation, which is worsened by repeated and deadly attacks, which has victimized many families, civilians or military. In light of the situation, my delegation is very happy for the progress achieved on universalization of the ATT and its active implementation in state parties. Anything which can contribute to the reduction of the harmful effects of these weapons by terrorist groups. It's appropriate to highlight that the illegal trade of light and small and handed weapons enhances insecurity and banditism, which attacks any attempts at development. Thus, it is necessary to recall here that only the state players should have access to weapons, and that they should ensure their appropriate management and security. That is why my country would like to recall the urgency of the control of arms and to call for a greater work in transparency and sharing of practical points, as well as information on the export of weapons, their use, and stock management. In this respect, we encourage the various parties to encourage solidarity and cooperation at the international level. Since the adoption of the ATT, Burkina Faso has endeavored to implement the pertinent provisions. At the national level, my country has been working to apply the ATT with the adoption of appropriate legal texts. Mr. President, allow me to conclude my intervention by thanking the Secretariat for the efforts that have been undertaken in the application of the treaty. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Mexico, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. We'd like to thank the effort of the Chair of the CSP for putting forward this draft working paper, which covers a problem which affects in a disproportionate manner different countries. The traffic of SALW affects Latin America and the Caribbean. Mexico, specifically in the past years, has had a rate of homicide of approximately 75%, which are committed with a smaller light weapon. That's why the theme that's been picked by the Chair couldn't be more relevant and timely. And we support his working paper. Strengthening the coordination to avoid diversion is key, as well as secure and sound management of stockpiles. The chapter on synergies with ATT, between ATT and other fora, and the control of arms and non-proliferation are also two stellar themes which we have worked on in the past, because we believe they will contribute to reduce by 2030 the existence of SALWs. We believe we should mention the Inter-American Convention, CIFTA, against illicit manufacturing and trafficking in firearms, ammunitions, explosive, and other related materials. We need to recall that the adoption of CIFTA has been the first international instrument to cover illicit trade of these weapons. Bilateral and multilateral platforms are needed to fight against the illicit traffic of SALW, and we'd like to strengthen the links between ATT and CIFTA. We also call on states that have acceded to CIFTA to contribute to the application of this convention. We also believe that as part of national efforts aligned with the ATT's efforts, my country has carried out the following measures. Mexico chaired the Convention of the UN against transnational violence and facilitated the exchange of information to gather information on current trends. We need to strengthen the capacities at the national and international level of specialized units to compile data on this matter. We need to consider links between the different types of violence. Mexican authorities have developed guides such as illicit traffic of capital.
México también ha comenzado a incorporar.
Mexico has also incorporated gender perspective in its policies, given the effect it has in women and children, or home violence. And we also see how women and children at home often have to take care of the victims of armed violence. We also would like to highlight the role played by civil society. More than ever, we need international cooperation and mutual assistance and mutual responsibility to make face to the problems derived from the violence committed with small and light weapons or munitions that affect different regions of the world, namely Latin America and the Caribbean. We welcome the recommendations of the chair, which appear in the final chapter of his working paper, and which we think will be a good starting point to continue with our exchange. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Thank you, Mexico. The floor is open for Japan, please.
Excuse me, did you give me the floor, Mr. President?
Yes, I did. Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Mr. President, at the outset, Japan would like to express sincere appreciation for your efforts to make advancement of this precious process leading to the CSP7, despite the unprecedented circumstances due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Japan stands ready to work with all other delegations to achieve substantive progress towards CSP7. And I assure you, Mr. President, of my delegation's full support and cooperation throughout the CSP7 cycle. I also appreciate your dedication to prepare and to share with us your working paper of great value, which you have just introduced. I would like also to thank ATT Secretariat for excellent preparatory work for this week's meeting. Mr. President, since the 1990s, when the necessity of addressing the issue of small arms and light weapons was raised and initially discussed in the international fora, Japan has actively and constantly engaged in this issue by submitting relevant UN General Assembly resolutions and providing assistances to implement diverse projects focusing on the collection and disposal of SALW. In 2020, Japan jointly submitted with Colombia and South Africa a draft resolution entitled "The Illicit Trade in Small Arms and Light Weapons in All Its Aspects" to the UN General Assembly, which was adopted by consensus last December. The resolution emphasizes the importance of eradicating illicit trade in SALW, including transfer to non-governmental groups, as well as of implementing the UN Program of Action to prevent, combat, and eradicate the illicit trade in SALW in all its aspects by each state. Furthermore, Japan has contributed $2 million to Saving Lives entity, Salient, a UN funding facility outlined in the UN Secretary General's Agenda for Disarmament, to support enhancing and improving capacity for conventional arms control. We sincerely hope that Salient will contribute to facilitating international cooperation as a tool among member states for preventing diversion of SALW. Mr. President, addressing the threats arising from the illicit trade and inadequate stockpile management of SALW remains a pressing issue for the international community. In this respect, if state parties agree on discussing this issue under the ATT framework during the CSP7 cycle, we need careful consideration on which areas or aspects of the SALW issues should be focused for further effective implementation of the treaty. The synergy between the UN Program of Action and the ATT can be beneficial, but we should also be mindful of the need to avoid any duplication with other international instruments, as well as any deviation from the norms already established by them. From this point of view, Japan expects fine-tuning works and discussions be conducted in order to well frame our discussions on this item so that they could serve constructively the primary objectives of the ATT. Lastly, Japan is looking forward to achieve discussions to make tangible progress during this week, and we are ready to contribute with all stakeholders towards a successful CSP7. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Japan. Thank you. Thank you for your very wise words. I now turn to, I'll read out the next list of 3 speakers, and then we'll go from there. I have on my list Panama, the European Union, and France. The floor is open for Panama, please.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. We'd like to thank Sierra Leone on its working text to strengthen the efforts to eliminate illicit trade of SALWs. And we applaud that he's picked this as his theme. The traffic of SALWs is a global threat which affects namely women and children, as they are the most vulnerable within armed conflict, terrorism, organized crime, and armed violence. It is also a hurdle for the consolidation of peace and respect of human rights and international humanitarian law, and the promotion of sustainable development. The fight against the proliferation of these weapons requires adopting coherent measures, as well as the United Nations complementary actions. We need a coordinated framework which will be regulated to obtain the objectives of this process. The document at hand seeks all of this, as it wishes to identify the links between the ATT and other regional and international instruments to avoid illicit trade and to safely manage stockpiles. The objectives that are identified are also coherent with the Secretary General's agenda for disarmament, namely through its pillar Disarmament to Save Lives, which calls on states to mitigate the humanitarian impact of conventional weapons and to eliminate excessive stockpiles. We also coincide with discussing this matter in the WGETI and to recognize the role that can be carried out by the VTS. At a regional level, we'd wish to highlight the SIFTA, as this is the first regional instrument which is legally binding and which specifically covers regulation of small and light weapons, which has served as a model for the protocol on fire weapons. SICA has also adopted different initiatives, including a code of conduct for Central American states on the transfer of munitions and small and light weapons and other related material. Finally, we think it would be necessary to clearly identify the link between SALWs and violence against women and children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Panama. Thank you, Excellency. Thanks for the very kind words and insights. The floor is now open for the European Union, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, and congratulations on your appointment in this function as President of the CSP7, and thank you for guiding us through these meetings in such a wonderful way. Mr. President, on behalf of the European Union and the following aligning countries, Turkey, the Republic of North Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Iceland, the Republic of Moldova, and Georgia, we would like to thank you for the draft working paper on strengthening efforts to eradicate the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons and ensure efficient stockpile management. The topic you have chosen as the core thematic focus of your ATT presidency and for the 7th Conference of States Parties is intrinsically linked to key objectives of the Arms Trade Treaty. It is also a timely topic, as demonstrated by the recent explosions at military barracks in Bata, the largest city and commercial capital of Equatorial Guinea, which had dramatic consequences. The diversion, illicit trade, and unauthorized use of conventional arms, and especially small arms and light weapons and their related ammunition, continue to constitute a serious impediment for global peace, security, and sustainable development. The prevention of the diversion of conventional arms is one of the primary objectives of the ATT since its inception. We therefore welcome the choice of this topic for a thematic discussion at CSP7 and its further inclusion in the work of the Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementation. Your proposal to strengthen efficient stockpile management in order to prevent diversion in the post-delivery phase, including stockpile security and management, is an important aspect that has not yet been addressed in the context of the ATT. We agree with you, Mr. President, that we should explore further synergies between various instruments and initiatives, such as the UN Programme of Action to Prevent, Combat and Eradicate the Illicit Trade in Small Arms and Light Weapons, the International Tracing Instrument, the Firearms Protocol, African Union Silencing the Gun Initiative, and ongoing discussions on technical guidelines. The ATT is the first arms regulation treaty to recognize the link between conventional arms transfers and gender-based violence, and its effective implementation can contribute to eliminating violence against women and girls. The EU strategy against illicit firearms, small arms and light weapons and their ammunition, adopted by the European Council in November 2018, underlines that the EU will systematically mainstream gender consideration in the fight against gun violence and small arms and light weapon control. In this regard, an EU Council decision was adopted in support of gender mainstream policies, programs, and actions in the fight against small arms and trafficking and misuse. The EU is actively working towards increasing understanding of gender-specific impacts of the illicit arms trade in small arms and light weapons, with a view to improving national policies and programs. As such, and in line with the decision taken at Conference of State Parties number 5, the EU strongly recommends the integration of a gender perspective into your working paper and more generally into the work of CSP7. Many small arms and light weapons control activities funded by the EU, such as the Physical Security and Stockpile Management Project in Africa, have also contributed to preventing diversion of conventional arms and ammunition throughout their life cycle. The EU has allocated over 83 million euros from its foreign policy funds to small arms and light weapons projects over the past years. To name a few examples, the EU supports the Southeastern and Eastern Europe Clearinghouse for the Control of Small Arms and Light Weapons, CSAC, for the implementation of the Regional Roadmap on Combating Illicit Arms Trafficking in the Western Balkans. The EU also supports the OAS in countering illicit proliferation and trafficking of small arms and ammunition and their impact in Latin America and the Caribbean in the framework of the EU strategy against illicit firearms, small arms, and light weapons. A third example is the support for Ukraine's efforts to combat illicit trafficking in weapons, ammunition, and explosives in cooperation with the OSCE. A fourth example aims at enhancing security and safety of small arms and light weapons and ammunition stockpiles through the development of an internationally recognized system that would allow independent validations of certification of compliance by states with open international standards on a voluntary basis, displaying their ability to address and prevent diversion and accidental explosions. We are ready to further exchange views and provide you with a list of all EU activities and projects in this regard. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Excellency. It is impossible to disguise my delight at this ringing endorsement from such a large and powerful bloc of states. Thank you so very much, European Union. The floor is open for France, please.
Mr. President, first allow me to congratulate you for acceding to the presidency of CSP7. We totally agree with what has been said by the European Union. We would like to thank you for the presentation of your priorities of this presidency for the 7th Conference of States Parties to the Arms Trade Treaty. France welcomes your proposal to make the consolidation of efforts to eradicate illicit trafficking in small arms and light weapons and their ammunition the main theme of our discussions this year. Preventing and combating illicit trafficking in conventional arms is one of the 2 pillars of the Arms Trade Treaty. As you know, France is particularly committed to ensuring that the fight against the diversion of legally transferred conventional weapons is one of the priority areas of work carried out in the framework of the working group dedicated to the implementation of the Arms Trade Treaty. We fully agree with your approach, calling for enhanced synergies between the provisions of the Arms Trade Treaty and those of other relevant multilateral instruments. The full and consistent implementation of these different instruments in a comprehensive manner will allow us to consolidate our efforts in this field in a sustainable manner. It is through increased coordination and cooperation, both among existing instruments among all stakeholders, that we can effectively combat the trafficking and diversion of conventional arms and ammunition. Diversion can occur at any point in the life cycle of a weapon, whether during a transfer or in the supply chain. Diversion can also occur from a stockpile held by a government force. Strengthening the physical security of arms and ammunition depots and implementing appropriate management is essential in this regard. While the ATT does not include specific measures in this area, the management and securing of stockpiles does contribute to its full implementation and to the pursuit of its aims and objectives. Mr. Chairman, France agrees with your proposals regarding the topics that could be further developed in the framework of the work carried out within the subgroup on Article 11 of the treaty. Some of the proposals made in this document would nevertheless need to be clarified, in particular those relating to the conditions and specific guarantees concerning storage facilities that could be agreed between exporting and importing states in order to guarantee their feasibility. We also believe that the exchange of information on stockpile management measures could be encouraged, including in the context of updating the initial reports, but this should not be rather an obligation. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, France is ready to discuss this issue in the framework of the intersessional process prior to the 7th CSP. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Thank you. We even before that intersessional period, we will highly recommend states to share their comments and suggestions to us directly through the presidency or through the secretariat. I think that would be extremely useful. Thanks for the ringing, the endorsement as well. The next set of states on my list, Switzerland, United Kingdom, and Control Arms. The floor is open for Switzerland, please.
Monsieur le Président, tout d'abord.
Mr. President, first, thank you. We would like to tell you the pleasure we have in seeing you presiding over the ATT and the gratitude for the way in which you're dealing with your task. We are convinced that with your enlightened guidance, we'll be able to move forward in the implementation of the ATT despite the difficulties that we are facing. In this context, we would like to thank you for your working document on the aims at eradicating the trade in SALW and appropriate stockpile management. This is 2 very pertinent themes for which progress it would be very welcome. The 3 following points on these themes relating to your working document. First, we would think it appropriate to carry out a mapping of international and regional instruments which are pertinent in this respect, and to use the orientations which are appropriate. Here I'd like to the work of the OSCE, which established an effective program for participating states in this organization, updating guide of best practice on SALWs and also conventional arms management, dealing also with the issue of the illicit trade of arms and ammunition. These instruments are extremely pertinent for the work undertaken within the ATT. Switzerland has for over 20 years been active in regional international cooperation programs for active stockpile management, a field which a great deal remains to be done. The lessons acquired have been transcribed in the new module relating to organizational capacity, which will be published in the third edition of Technical International Guidelines from the UN. This third edition will be published during the year and could represent a useful source to feed our future discussions. Finally, Switzerland feels that the progress in the fields of post-transfer cooperation are essential for active and effective promotion of the ATT. We are therefore in favor of a discussion for importing and exporting countries on the best way in which such a cooperation could be structured. Substantive work has already been undertaken within the context of the treaty and other settings. He would like to refer to the study published by CIPRI with the financial endorsement of the federal endorsement of German Foreign Affairs, with a census of post-transfer measures. The grouping of these results with other outlooks could be a useful basis for the continuation of our discussion within the ATT. Mr. President, Switzerland feels that the provisions of the ATT to fight against illegal transfer and sales should be correlated with other pertinent documents. Exchange of best practice within the ATT would benefit from the UN program in this respect, and this complementarity is of special importance this year, as the seventh meeting is based on the prevention and the fight against the transfer of SALWs. In conclusion, we endorse the general trend of the various recommendations that are put forward in your working document. We feel that their adoption would contribute to progress the work undertaken within the context of the treaty and encourage you thus to continue your efforts so that we can take measures in this trend during the 7th CSP. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks for the insights. We will definitely take those on board. Next on my list is the United Kingdom, please. UK.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor. The UK would like to thank the Presidency for circulating the very well-put work discussion today. We welcome the focus on tackling illicit trade.
We have great difficulty hearing the speaker.
And the importance of the effective, safe, secure
louder. We can't hear. We can't hear you.
My apologies. Is that better? My apologies. I'm having. The UK would like to thank the Presidency for circulating very well working papers which informed our discussion today. We welcome the focus on tackling the illicit trade of all arms and weapons. The importance of the effective safety of small arms and light weapons have a legitimate role in ensuring security.
I'm sorry, but the speaker is completely chopped up.
Hundreds of thousands died a year. Undermines security.
UK, excellent. I think we'll have to come back to you. Nobody is hearing. There's a lot of difficulty. The audio is not very good. But we'll be back once you get the technical problems sorted out. Thank you. So can we have Control Arms, please, to take the floor?
Thank you, Ambassador. As we are taking the floor for the first time, on behalf of Control Arms, I would like to express our thanks to you and to the ATT Secretariat for your efforts to bring this unprecedented virtual meeting together, and to all nations joining here today for their contributions. On behalf of Control Arms and my organization, Security Research and Information Center, based in Kenya, I would like to thank the CSP7 presidency held by Sierra Leone for showing strength and resolve in this difficult time, and for choosing to focus this year's conference on a topic so critical to Africa and the global South, curbing the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons with a specific focus on stockpile security. Stockpile security is one of the key elements required to prevent diversion of weapons. Without taking careful steps to ensure arms are delivered to the intended recipient and to safeguard those weapons upon arrival, an otherwise regulated arms transfer could result in further fueling armed violence and conflict. Well-documented cases of diversion of arms and ammunition from arms and munition stockpiles, particularly in East Africa, demonstrate the effects of poor stockpile security, especially in my region. Overcoming key challenges to achieving effective national stockpile management in Africa and beyond requires a concerted effort by all states involved in the arms transfer chain. Mr. President, in this regard, Control Arms welcomes the President's paper as an opportunity to strengthen the implementation of Article 11, to bolster cooperation and assistance, highlight the importance of stockpile security, and to explore synergies with other instruments, including the UN Programme of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons, the International Tracing Instrument, and the UN Firearms Protocol. This year in particular provides an unprecedented opportunity to bridge the work being done in the context of the ATT with that of the UNPOA. The 7th biennial meeting of states parties of the Programme of Action will include 2 agenda items relevant to our thematic discussions this year. One that considers ongoing efforts on how to prevent and combat diversion and illicit transfer of small arms and light weapons, and another that will review international cooperation and assistance in these areas. Control Arms encourages all ATT stakeholders to follow the BMS7 this year as the discussions there may inform and enhance work on the ATT CSP7 thematic focus. The President's thematic focus also serves to encourage ATT states parties, exporters, transit states, and importers alike to consider stockpile security in the context of mitigation measures. Control Arms encourages the sub-working group on Article 11 to fully consider stockpile security and management, both under discussions on assessing the risk of diversion, scheduled to take place later this week, and in later discussions scheduled during the CSP8 cycle. Control Arms encourages the newly formed Diversion Information Exchange Forum to include the role of stockpile security in close discussions and in its regular updates to this sub-working group. In particular, it would be useful to learn from examples of actual cases when mitigation measures proved effective to combat diversion, as well as cases when these measures may not have achieved their intended purpose. Control Arms welcomes the 4 recommendations set out in the President's paper and encourages states parties to take them forward beyond the CSP7 cycle, either as part of the sub-working group on Article 11 or in a special session dedicated to implementing the recommendations of CSP presidencies. As ever, Control Arms and its members stand ready to work with the presidency in developing its thematic focus further. Thank you for your attention, Mr. President.
And thank you very much, Control Arms. A special thanks to the role of civil society for their resourcefulness, knowledge, and assistance in all this work. Thank you very much. I see that the UK is now prepared to come on board. This kind of thing happened to me once I was in rural Sierra Leone, and I logged in, and there was a problem. It shows that technology is an equal opportunity inflictor of embarrassment. The UK, you have the floor now, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your understanding. I hope you're able to hear me clearly.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, this is a good start. So firstly, thank you so much for giving me the floor, and thank you for your understanding with our technical issues. The UK would like to thank the Presidency for circulating the working paper, which informs our discussions today. We welcome the focus on tackling the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons, and the importance of the effective, safe and secure management of stockpiles. Small arms and light weapons have a legitimate role in ensuring defence and security. However, as we all recognise, their diversion and misuse cost hundreds of thousands of lives every year, undermine security and sustainable development, and fuel conflict, crime and terrorism. Full and effective implementation of the Arms Trade Treaty would make a significant contribution to addressing these issues. A well-regulated legal trade in conventional arms will contribute to reducing diversion. This requires robust national export licensing regimes, developing international cooperation, and the inclusion of wider stakeholders. The Arms Trade Treaty requires states parties to consider the risk of diversion and export assessment. It is essential that this requirement is met rigorously. Addressing physical security and stockpile management issues in importing states can help to reduce the risk of diversion through loss, thefts, and accidents. International cooperation and assistance is key in this area, as existing guidelines and best practice materials are a key resource in ensuring robust standards in stockpile management and lessening the risk of diversion. The Arms Trade Treaty provides an essential framework for tackling diversion and ensuring the safe and secure management of stockpiles. The key is the full implementation of the scope and object of the treaty, ensuring high common standards for regulating the international trade in conventional arms and preventing their illicit trade and diversion. While it is right that we look for ways to improve the implementation of the treaty, we must ensure that we do not build unnecessary barriers to fully realising its object and purpose. Setting additional burdens beyond the obligations of the treaty, for example, in the area of post-delivery requirements, can risk creating insurmountable hurdles which are detrimental to full implementation. And thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you once again for your patience.
Thank you very much, United Kingdom. Thank you, and thank you for your insights and support. Thank you so very much, much appreciated. Next on my list, we have Canada, Peru, and Nigeria. The floor is open for Canada, please. Hello? Is Canada there? I mean, these are the three last states that signed up, pre-signed to speak at this section. But can we have Peru, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Since this is the first time we take the floor, we would like to congratulate you for your for your presidency. We are aware of your able and your capacity to guide our discussions. We welcome the thematic discussion and the issue that you have proposed, President, the strengthening effort to eradicate the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons and ensure sufficient stockpile management. It is for sure a specific issue that is very relevant in the framework of the ATT. Illicit trafficking in small arms and light weapons is a threat for the world, for the peace and security of the world, especially in our area, Central and Southern America, having a special impact in women and girls and children. We are very pleased that the government of Sierra Leone has decided to explore this important issue in the framework of the ATT. We express our full support to the work document that you submitted for this document, for this meeting. We are very interested in the last section of this document because in it you invite state parties to consider 4 areas that subsequently could be examined in detail by the working subgroup on Article 11. We consider that these 4 areas are very relevant. And let me refer to 2 of them. Number 1 and 2 of this section in this document. About number 1.1, we welcome the synergies between the different regional and international instruments with regard to conventional arms. We agree that using better these instruments and their guidelines would strengthen the implementation of ATT and will contribute to the fight against illicit trafficking. Now, there are new challenges in the arm trade. E-commerce, 3D printing of arms, cyber attacks, crypto coins. In these areas, we think it's important to have multilateral response that can help states to fight these challenges. About point 2, we highlight the international cooperation as a transversal theme for the application of the treaty, especially in the post-transfer area or post-delivery of arms. In that area, importers and exporters have to take common action to prevent, detect, and address diversion. Now, the obligation of the ATT are very important, especially in target 16.4 of the ODS. Thank you very much.
Peru, thank you. Thank you so very much. And I'm glad that this paper, it resonates with the situation around the world has been highlighted so very strongly. Next on my list is Nigeria. Nigeria,
okay.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nigeria joins other state parties in congratulating the President of the 7th Conference of State Parties and wishes to express gratitude for your excellent work during the intersessional period leading to the CSP7. We also appreciate the support from the state parties on the election of the CSP7 president, making him the 2nd African to lead this very important treaty after Nigeria. Mr. President, Nigeria's delegation wishes to express its confidence in your excellent leadership qualities and assure you of our utmost support. Mr. President, Nigeria welcomes the core thematic focus of the CSP7 titled Strengthening Efforts to Eradicate the Illicit Trade in Small Arms and Light Weapons and Ensuring Efficient Stockpile Management. Discussion on eradication of illicit trade in SALWs is not only timely, but absolutely necessary in view of the catastrophes created by proliferation of illicit arms across the globe, especially in Africa. Illicit possession of SALWs constitutes a serious threat to peace and stability. Heinous crimes such as kidnapping, gender-based violence, insurgency, terrorism, amongst others, are direct consequences of illicit trade in SALWs. Indeed, many democracies across the world suffer instability arising from illicit possession of arms. Mr. President, clearly, the ATT is a strategic instrument that has the capability of minimizing the proliferation of illicit arms and their associated threats. We therefore welcome the thematic focus of the CSP7 presidency. Consequently, state parties are invited to strengthen their capacity in tackling diversion of conventional arms within and outside their jurisdictions by reinforcing their control systems in line with Article 11. We call for cooperation among states on transfer of arms, including their importation, exports, transshipments, and brokering in line with Article 11.3. Similarly, we welcome the call for effective stockpile management as a tool for curbing diversion. Mr. President, the proliferation of SALWs across the world, especially in Africa, indeed calls for great concern. The debilitating effect of its widespread misuse poses a serious survival threat for our people. Violent crimes as GBVs, kidnapping of school children, indiscriminate and wanton killings of innocent persons is causing displacement of people from their homes and farmlands, the resultant effect of which is threatening our livelihoods and food security. Mr. President, Nigeria fully supports the reopening of discussions among state parties on the needs to eradicate the illicit trade of SALWs and efficient stockpile management. This, we believe, will assist states in sharing experiences with a view of properly checking the proliferation of arms and its consequential extent, so threats. Thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Nigeria. Thank you for the very strong words of support. I haven't gotten indication from Canada that they would like to speak. If that's the case, I'll have to. Oh, is Canada prepared now to come on board?
Yes, Mr. President, with our apologies.
Let's have Canada then.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, my apologies for this little mistake out of hours here. So, Mr. President, as this is the first time Canada is taking the floor during these working group meetings, we wish to congratulate Sierra Leone on assuming the presidency of the 7th Conference of States Parties. I wish to express our gratitude to you, your team, and the Secretariat for organizing this meeting despite the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Canada praises the efforts put into this draft working paper that reflects current global and regional concerns related to the illicit trade and stockpile management of these particular conventional weapons. We are confident that the current thematic focus will be beneficial towards the efforts by all states parties to counter the global threat that the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons can pose. We support the efforts to establish a dialogue and linkages between the ATT and other international instruments that tackle the illicit trade and address diversion, such as the UN Programme of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons, as well as other regional instruments. Canada agrees that those synergies can play a role in strengthening stockpile management-related measures that ultimately serve as important preventive practices that states parties can adopt. Canada is pleased to see the references to mitigation measures that exporting and importing states can adopt at the post-delivery stage, such as post-delivery cooperation programs, technical or financial assistance, among others. We strongly believe that international cooperation between exporting and importing states should continue after delivery in order to mitigate risks of diversion. In this regard, Canada welcomes the proposed potential areas for further inquiry and exchange in the context of the Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementation Sub-Working Group on Article 11. Canada is particularly keen on efforts to formalize discussions concerning post-delivery cooperation experiences, as well as post-delivery verification measures that importing and exporting states parties can implement through close cooperation. To this end, Canada is developing a working paper on post-delivery verification measures based on informal discussions we have endeavored with the several states parties. We will provide more details on this initiative at the Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementations Sub-Working Group on Article 11 and its meeting. Many thanks.
Thank you so very much, Canada. Thanks for the strong words of support. Thank you, really appreciate it. In the interest of time, I'll call out four on my list, four countries to make statements, and I'm hoping we can make the statement as brief as possible because we are really running against time at the moment. Number one, China. Number two, Ireland. Number three, Uruguay, and number four, Georgia. Those are the countries on my list. Can China take the floor, please?
Thank you, Mr. President. In July 2020, China acceded to the ATT. This is the first time that China is participating the preparatory meeting of the CSP as a state party for the first time, and its associated working group meetings. We would like to thank the President and Secretariat for all the considerate arrangements made for this meeting. We would like to work with other state parties to promote the CSP and the working groups to make positive results so as we can further improve the universality of the ATT and its effectiveness. Mr. President, China attaches great importance to combating the illicit trade in conventional arms, especially light and small arms. China actively supports and participates in the efforts of the international community to address this issue and appreciates the President's working paper on combating the illicit trade in small arms and light arms and strengthening stockpile management. As pointed out by the President, at the UNGA last year, a resolution related to ATT was adopted. For the first time, ATT-related contents were included in a resolution adopted at the UNGA. I would like to stress that in the operation paragraph number 9,
out in Article 6 and 7 of the treaty, and to prevent diversion to unauthorized end users of conventional weapons, inter alia, through efforts to improve efficient stockpile management.
China firmly supports multilateralism and the central role of the UN in conventional arms control. We actively support and implement the UN Programme of Action on Small Arms and the International Instrument for Identifying and Tracing Illicit Trade Arms, and keep submitting reports to the UN Register of Conventional Arms, and support the Silencing the Guns initiative in Africa. China believes that the treaty should strengthen coordination, cooperation, and information exchange with other multilateral mechanisms and initiatives so as to complement and promote each other and strive for synergy. This will help attract more countries to accede to the treaty and gain further support to combat illicit transfers of conventional arms. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, China. Thank you. Next on the list is Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. President. I hope you can hear me well. Ireland aligns itself. Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear, yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. President. Sorry, the sound dropped just briefly. Ireland aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union and would like to make the following remarks in a national capacity. At the outset, I'd like to congratulate you, Mr. President, and thank you for your leadership. I can assure you of the full support of my delegation. I would also like to thank you, Mr. President, for the presentation of your working paper. Ireland fully supports your proposal for the core theme of CSP7 to focus on strengthening efforts to eradicate the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons and ensuring efficient stockpile management. We also welcome the call in your paper to strengthen cooperation to prevent diversion in the post-delivery phase. These are central features of the treaty, and continuing our work on these matters is essential for the full implementation of the ATT and for its goals to be truly realised. Mr. President, unregulated weapons can perpetuate and exacerbate conflict and armed violence, facilitate serious violations of international human rights and humanitarian law, including gender-based violence, and contribute to insecurity and instability. As my colleague from the European Union and other delegations have noted, we believe that your paper would benefit from incorporating a specific focus on the gender dimensions of the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons. These issues are well documented and, within the framework of the ATT, are well established. After all, the ATT is the first international agreement to recognise the link between the arms trade and gender-based violence. As such, my delegation believes that your working paper could be strengthened by drawing attention to the evidence, which clearly highlights the correlation between diversion and illicit arms flows in both conflict and non-conflict affected areas, and the rate of violent crimes and intimidation against women and girls. Additionally, there are aspects related to the issue of gender and ammunition management and diversion. Not only is ammunition required for the discharge of weapons, it's also the main component in IEDs, which in turn can have devastating consequences, including distinctly gendered impacts. Mr. President, your working paper rightly emphasises the need to focus on strengthening the synergies that exist between the ATT and the global framework for arms control, non-proliferation and disarmament. My delegation fully supports this focus and particularly welcomes any opportunity to improve the links between the ATT and the SALW Programme of Action. Additionally, Mr. President, my delegation believes it will be beneficial to look beyond the world of arms control and examine the possibilities to integrate the work being carried out here in Geneva, for example, at the Human Rights Council on arms transfers. This work is directly relevant to the ATT in general and specifically to the gender considerations raised by my delegation. A new report on the impact of arms transfers on human rights from the OHCHR, published last year, addresses the gendered impact of diverted and illicitly trafficked arms on the human rights of women and girls, and calls for states to tackle these harms by addressing the root causes of gender-based discrimination and violence. The report was released in early July last year as part of the Human Rights Council's 44th session, following on a mandate issued by the Council through its biennial resolution on arms transfers, again last adopted in 2019. This consensus resolution from 2019 and subsequent report explore the specific impact of international arms trade on women and girls. They provide an important reinforcement from the human rights community to the commitments made by states in the context of disarmament and arms control forums. Finally, Mr. President, I would like to highlight the role played by civil society on this issue, as well as the crucial role it plays in awareness raising and encouraging universalization. Civil society actors have a depth of expertise on the theme you've chosen for this CSP, and we should continue the excellent collaborative relationship between states and civil society that has characterized the ATT since its inception. I thank you, Mr. President. My delegation looks forward to working with you and your team in order to prepare the ground for what I'm sure will be a very successful and impactful CSP7. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Ireland, for those very helpful suggestions. Yes, civil society. My presidency has placed great emphasis on the role of civil society in all of these, and we take them as extremely active partners. Next on my list is Georgia, which is the last speaker, and then we'll try and close up this section. Georgia, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. On behalf of the Georgian representation, And thank you also for your presentation on the working paper that emphasizes the importance of the synergies between international instruments that are focused on the illicit small arms and trades and transfers of its small arms and light weapons, conventional weapons, and on stockpile management. So we, for the successful implementation for such an important issues, like minimize the risk of illicit transfers of small arms and light weapons. We recognized all that effective international and regional instruments like ATT is extremely important in order to encourage countries to conduct coordinately and in close collaboration, focusing on the goals and obligations of the ATT, on transparency among countries in their transfers that are highly welcomed, understanding that responsible control on international trade in small arms and light weapons and conventional weapons is directly principal for the maintenance of the peace and security of the society in the globe. Such a specific issue like stockpile management is one of the key aspects to achieve such a goal, like eliminate illicit transfers of weapons and their misuse that are directly linked with the successful and secure development of the international society. Georgia is the country in Caucasus region that is the only member state party of the ATT, and strongly fully supports the discussion of the next days and preparation for the CSP7, because we recognize and fully understand the important issues they are intending for the discussions. And I would like to add that it should be underlined that for many years, civil society has recognized that there is a direct link of effective control in arms transfers with the socio-political, humanitarian,
I think, Georgia, we've lost you. I have two more speakers on the list, so we'll do it quickly. My apologies. We have Uruguay and Argentina. After that, we'll have to really close the section in the interest of time. Every contribution we've had extremely important, and we would like to appeal to you, those who will not have the opportunity to speak up today, to kindly provide their comments and suggestions in writing to either us directly, the presidency,
yes,
or the secretariat. Oh, you are back. Yes, sorry.
Yes, I'm back. Thank
Yes,
you so much, Mr. President. Thank you so much. So it should be underlined that for many years, civil society has recognized that there is a direct link of effective control in arms transfers with the socio-political, humanitarian, and economical developments of the nations. Currently, the statistics of the destructive effects caused by the illegal spread of conventional arms and small arms and light weapons, not only in conflict zones, but also in peaceful regions, are terribly high. For the brief illustration, in 2017, there was a dramatic increase in the number of violent deaths worldwide, with approximately 589,000 people losing their lives violently. Based on the various studies, there could be several grounds for arms proliferation, like countries and even regions with weak border controls, inadequate legislative and enforcement instruments, high level of corruption, and purely managed state stockpiles, purely developed national export control systems, growing demand of terrorist groups to acquire the arms and ammunition, globalization process. This enables the non-state actors easily access the newest weapons technologies. These are some other factors highlighted the urgent need to develop a common platform for states to ensure an adequate control on conventional arms in order to minimize the consequences of their diversion from legal transfers or their illegal movement across the borders to the illicit markets and for their misuse. So we are strongly encouraged and we are highly excited to take part in all the preparation meetings and working groups for those days. And thank you, Mr. President, for giving us these opportunities. Thank you so much.
And thank you so very much, Uruguay. Thanks for your comments and suggestions, and thanks for the kind words. Oh, Georgia, I'm sorry. Uruguay now, I think I have a fondness for Uruguay. Uruguay, you have the floor.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. President.
Uruguay would like to congratulate Sierra Leone for presiding over the 7th CSP of the ATT. We would like to thank them for the working document they have submitted on the topic of strengthening efforts to eradicate illicit trade of SAWLs and to ensure efficient stockpile management, which is often the source of organized crime and gender-based violence. We need to emphasize the gender dimension, as Mexico and Ireland just stated, to achieve this objective. Women are often victims and also those in charge of the households where weapons are used. Children are also very vulnerable victims, and they are at the center of many of the Development Sustainable Goals. We need to strengthen regional cooperation and to effectively manage stockpile in order to strengthen the effective implementation of the treaty. You can count on our support to help you in achieving this goal. Thank you.
Support. Last on our list, Argentina. After that, we will have to close the section. Purely in the interest of time, there's my colleague is waiting to displace me. Argentina, please.
Yes.
As this is the first time that my country intervenes, I'd like to thank you for your efforts in carrying out these preparatory meetings in the face of the 7th CSP. We'd also like to thank the Secretariat for all the arrangements they've carried out in order to be able to meet today. The negative effect of diversion of SAWLs not only affects Africa, but also Latin America and other regions, and this is a very timely topic to have been picked by the 7th CSP. We also believe we should introduce a dimension on violence, gender-based violence in this conference. We would like to thank you for the working document you have submitted to us on the central theme. Argentina would like to signal that in our case, export of weapons to any other state requires an import authorization from the importing country. And this has to be done before our nation authorizes the export. Therefore, the improvement and development of national control systems should include documentation on munitions to avoid diversion. All of this is necessary. Nonetheless, the evaluation of imports and exports is carried out with subjective criteria, and therefore they are not always precise. We would suggest to create an ad hoc commission or an ad hoc working group within the ATT to define risk indicators linked to export of weapons. The idea would be to establish objective and common criteria in line with Article 6 and 7 of the ATT, which would include minimum standards to be assessed in each case. These minimum standards would then need to be officially approved by each state when and taken into account when they issue the authorization necessary to carry out the imports. In any case, our comments have also been forwarded in written text. And once more, and to finalize, I'd like to congratulate the President for his designation and for his leadership in these times of pandemia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Argentina, and thank you. We appreciate the support that we received from Argentina since we became president. Thank you. Excellencies, delegates, we are closing the session now. We are at the end of the session, and those who we are unable to speak but have something interesting or important to say about this paper, kindly do so in writing. You can send it directly to us or to through the Secretariat to us. Thank you so very much. I'm extremely pleased that this has been a very lively session, and I hope to see you again very soon. We'll continue seeing each other throughout the week, and hopefully we will have a proper in-person meeting by the time of the main conference. Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks. The Secretariat. Yes, the Secretariat will take over now from this point, and I'll run away to a little corner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, we've finished the first part of today's proceedings, and we will, without much ado, proceed to the second session of today, which focuses on Article 6 and 7. And I invite Ambassador Sanchez of Spain to proceed to the podium to facilitate the next session on Article 6 and 7. You'll give us a few minutes to manage the transitions. Thank you.
Muy buenos días a todos los participantes.
Good morning to all the participants in today's meeting. As I did in other meetings, applying the principle of multilinguistic meetings, I will chair this meeting in my native language, Spanish, which is also the language of many members of this treaty. I will use English in some specific moments. First of all, I'd like to thank our president of the next meeting of the state parties for his kindness in inviting us to participate in this session. And I'd like to give a special thanks to the Treaty Secretariat for all the preparatory work that they've done, which has been essential for me to be able to prepare this meeting today. Our today's program, today's schedule, will have to be shortened due to time constraints. But I do hope we will have enough time. First of all, I'm going to present the report that has been distributed amongst you on good practices. And then we will listen to two thematic presentations on this exact exercise, the same concepts, which are very complementary with the effort that we're deploying. We will have the opportunity to ask questions to the presenters. And after their presentations and the Q&A session, we will have an exchange of views on this report. So, without further ado, I will begin my presentation, which will not go into details of the report that you all have, but it will be a general assessment of the whole report. In February 2020, in our last face-to-face session, I proposed a methodology for the exchange of good practices for the exercise of interpreting some concepts of Articles 6 and 7 in compliance with the mandate of the Conference of the State Parties. The methodology, I recognize, was ambitious and complex, and that was the nature of the exercise. Some delegations expressed concerns because they understood that the interpretation of the concepts at a national level was very sensitive and that they would not accept recommendation or instructions in the interpretation. And this was fully respected. The exercise of exchange of good practices underwent several waves of contributions. In total, there were 20 state parties, 1 organization of states, the European Union, and 3 non-governmental organizations. Honestly, there were less contributions than I would have expected and liked. But I do think they are enough to give us an idea of what we expected from this exercise. I want to acknowledge these contributions to the countries which submitted them: Germany, Australia, Belgium, Canada, Chile, Spain, France, Georgia, Ireland, Italy, Japan, Latvia, Madagascar, the Netherlands, Palestine, Paraguay, the United Kingdom, the Republic of Korea, Sweden, and Switzerland, in addition to the European Union, Control Arms, Safer World, and WILPF. My task was to work on these contributions. We were very different from each other. Some states strictly followed the proposed methodology, but others needed more space, more explanations, and there were all sorts of contributions: shorter, longer, simpler, more complex. My task was to group and unify the criteria beyond language differences, to find a homogeneity or diversity in these criteria. In short, although quantitatively it's been the result was very poor, because I would have liked more contributions, but as far as quality is concerned, it was very fruitful. The progress report that I presented is simple, without major text developments on my own, because I wanted to summarize the positions as much as possible and keep true to the original language. Some states wanted to express the same ideas with different terms. The ideas and concepts are similar, beyond nuances and variations. Sorry, there is someone who has a mic on. If we were talking about music, there would be variations on the same theme, that is, different expressions of the same ideas. Professor Klappen and Meyer Brand are experts who will make presentations. When we analyze the gross violations of international law, humanitarian law, beyond the violation case by case of this law, Professor Klappen and the other expert mentioned the same international instruments, which means that they have common references. And we can see this in any of the conferences. State parties analyze each situation case by case, but then they use the same legal international documents, the same references, and they use the same assessment system. Let's take another example. Violence against women and children. There is a subtle difference in different contributions from different countries, but basically all interpretations from all states respond to the same criteria. Use of violence in different cases in which victims are women or children. And they consider also the attitude of the exporter state or the recipient state with a gender perspective. So the result is satisfactory in the sense of what the report says about our way of interpreting the treaty, but this does not mean there is a unification or a recommendation. This is an exercise in the exchange of good practices, and what you see here is what we have received. It's a snapshot with a certain interpretive homogeneity with different sensibilities and a unity of criteria in the variety of nuances. Now, I would have liked to work on many more contributions, but my assessment is that the exercise has been satisfactory and is coming to an end. This table reflects the contributions of the delegations that have participated voluntarily. They've had a year to do it, and I think it's been enough time. Therefore, I propose to consider this exercise as completed, and with the amendments that you find necessary, endorses this report in order to present to the 7th Conference of the State Parties. And now I open the turn of participation to invite our guest speakers. Gross violations of international humanitarian law in the context of Article 7. Maya Bram is the presenter. And let me make her introduction in English, because my notes are in English.
Bram is a legal advisor in the Arms and Conduct of Hostilities Unit of the Legal Division of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Her present work focuses on IHL questions raised by new technologies of warfare, including increasing autonomy in weapons systems and the promotion of responsible transfers. Before joining the ICRC, Maya worked as a researcher, lecturer, and policy advisor for academic institutions, civil society organizations, and UN bodies in the fields of humanitarian action, disarmament, and human rights. Maya, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador, for inviting the ICRC to provide some kickoff remarks on the key concept of serious violations of IHL. And thanks also go to the Secretariat for facilitating and supporting these proceedings. From our perspective, the ATT's greatest strength lies in its recognition of the need to subject arms transfers to humanitarian considerations. And one mechanism by which this is achieved is through the requirement under Article 7(1)(bi) to assess the potential that exports of arms, ammunition, or parts and components could be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of IHL. So to kick off this session, I would first like to say a few words about what we deem the established meaning of serious violations of IHL to be, and then very briefly touch upon a couple of related practical issues that are key to the faithful implementation of this provision. The leading jurisprudence on the notion of serious violation of IHL comes from the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. In the Tadic case, the appeals chamber noted that a violation of IHL can be considered to be serious when it constitutes a breach of a rule protecting important values, and the breach must involve grave consequences to the victim. Based on an analysis of this case, as well as other international and national instruments and case law, someone has their microphone on? Okay, so based on an analysis of international and national case law and instruments, the ICSC has long taken the view that violations of IHL are in practice treated as serious if they endanger protected persons, notably civilians, or protected objects, like civilian objects, or if they otherwise breach important values. So whilst the majority of serious violations involve death, injury, destruction, or unlawful taking of property, this is not necessarily the case. It is possible for a serious violation to exist without physically endangering persons or objects directly, such as, for example, in the case of despoiling dead bodies. So this is a breach of an important value in this case. So a serious violation of IHL can therefore be committed against persons in the power of the enemy and during conduct of hostilities. It can result from an act or from an omission. It can itself constitute a serious act of gender-based violence or serious act of violence against women or children. So there is overlap with Article 7(4). It can take place in an international or a non-international armed conflict, and it can concern IHL rules codified in international treaties or rules of customary IHL. So concretely, serious violations of IHL are grave breaches as specified in the 4 Geneva Conventions, Articles 50, 51, 130, and 147. Grave breaches as specified in 1977 Additional Protocol 1. Violations of IHL that are criminalized under Article 8 of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. And violations of other IHL rules that can amount to war crimes under customary international humanitarian law. According to the summary of input to the methodology template for unpacking key concepts that was compiled by Ambassador Sanchez, it would appear that 11 out of the 20 submissions received or sort of indicate that in the assessment under Article 7, states do refer to IHL treaties and the ICC statute. From our perspective, we would invite states parties to refer to Rule 156 of the ICC's customary IHL study, which lists some war crimes on the customary IHL that are not included in the Rome Statute. And as Ambassador Sanchez has just pointed out in his introductory remarks, there is indeed much commonality in the reference framework that is used by states parties in the implementation of this article. From our perspective, we find this unpacking key concepts exercise useful in the contribution that it can make to the practically strengthening the implementation of Article 7 with a view to realizing the humanitarian objective of the treaty to reducing human suffering in practice. So with this in mind, a couple of very quick remarks. As is well known, the ICC has proposed a range of indicators that states should take into account in their assessment of risks of serious IHL violations, including consideration of a recipient's record of respect for IHL. Now, in contrast to international human rights law, which applies at all times, as Professor Clapham will no doubt explain in a couple of minutes, IHL only applies in armed conflict. And as such, indicators about a recipient's record of IHL are only pertinent if the recipient is or has been engaged in an armed conflict. So for a thorough risk assessment under Article 7, it is thus essential that states parties correctly determine whether an armed conflict exists on the territory of the recipient state and whether a recipient is a party to an armed conflict. And in this regard, to support these determinations, I would invite you to consult the 2020 commentary to the Third Geneva Convention, commentary to Common Articles 2 and 3, that the ICC has drafted on the basis of in-depth analysis of state practice and doctrine, and with extensive engagement of officials and experts worldwide. The second point I would make in this regard is that in cases where there is no information about a recipient's record of respect for IHL, because the recipient has not or not sufficiently recently been involved in an armed conflict, the occurrence of a pattern of international human rights law violations can be indicative of a risk of serious IHL violations. And consideration of the human rights law record is particularly important when the recipient is likely to engage in an armed conflict in the foreseeable future. Finally, from the vantage point that the rationale behind the risk assessment mandated under Article 7 is to prevent serious violations of IHL, and in line with states' distinct obligation to respect and ensure respect for IHL, it would, in our view, not be appropriate to apply a criminal law standard of evidence when assessing a recipient's past record of respect for IHL, nor would it be appropriate to deny an export only if the exporter has proved beyond reasonable doubt that the arms will be used to commit a serious violation or that the recipient intends to so use the arms. So in sum, then, I would recall that it is the prerogative and the responsibility of states parties to interpret the terms of the ATT in good faith, in accordance with their ordinary meaning, in their context, and in light of the ATT's humanitarian object and purpose. The meaning of serious violations of IHL, in our view, is well established, and this provides a sort of a legal baseline for unpacking this key notion, a baseline below which regional and national interpretations must not fall. So within the limits of our mandate and expertise, we stand ready to support the development of further practical guidance in the implementation of Article 7, and I look forward to the exchange of views. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brem, for your presentation. Without further ado, we'll go to the second kickoff presentation, Serious Violations of International Human Rights Law in the Context of Article 7, by the Professor Andrew Clapham, who is Professor of International Law at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies here in Geneva. He teaches international human rights law, the laws of war, and public international law. Currently, he is serving as a member of the UN Commission on Human Rights in South Sudan, and he participated already in the negotiations of ATT on behalf of the International Commission of Jurists and is the main author of the chapters on Articles 6 and 7 in the Oxford University Press Commentary on the ATT that I'm pretty certain we have all studied thoroughly. Thank you very much, Professor Clapham. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's very kind of you to invite me to this meeting and to give me the opportunity to make a few remarks and later take questions on the meaning of a serious violation of human rights law as found in the Arms Trade Treaty. I've provided you and the Secretariat with the chapter that you referred to, and I will be essentially speaking to that, and we can go into more detail if you like. During the drafting of the treaty, the expression "a serious violation of human rights law" was never really discussed. The civil society organizations did make some proposals, and I'll refer to those a little later. So we have to use normal rules of treaty interpretation to understand what this expression means. And the word serious, I think, can describe the type of human right that is being considered, or indeed it could refer to the gravity and scope of the violation involved. And I think both these meanings of serious apply here. So, for example, any violation of the right to life or the prohibition of torture would be inherently serious, whereas other rights might need to be violated grossly, as you referred to, for example, where the physical integrity is harmed, and we've heard quite a lot about sexual violence. Or it could be that the human right is violated consistently or in a widespread or systematic manner. So that expression, widespread or systematic, of course, conjures up the idea of this category of crimes against humanity. And it's probably worth recalling here that the International Law Commission's original draft Code of Crimes Against Peace and Security of Mankind contained something which came before the modern concept of crimes against humanity. And at that time, it was called systematic or mass violations of human rights. So I think on any definition, crimes against humanity are, excuse me, I lost my, crimes against humanity are serious violations of human rights. But of course, crimes against humanity are mentioned in Article 6.3, just as grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions are mentioned. So a serious violation of IHL and a serious violation of human rights must be something a bit wider than this category of crimes against humanity. So what might it include? I think another category which clearly qualifies as a serious violation of human rights would be what we call a violation of a peremptory norm of international law, also known by the Latin jus cogens, which means, as you know, compelling law. It's a sort of higher type of human rights law. And in the chapter I referred to, I said that this is not yet fixed in international law, and states are not clear exactly what goes into this category. But since I wrote that in the Oxford commentary, the International Law Commission of the United Nations has indeed drawn up a draft set of conclusions on jus cogens, and they have now completed the first reading, and it's before the UN General Assembly. And they have a non-exhaustive list of jus cogens violations, which covers aggression, genocide, crimes against humanity, the basic rules of IHL, the prohibition of racial discrimination and apartheid, prohibition of slavery, prohibition of torture, and the right to self-determination. And I think we've heard about international humanitarian law that applies in times of armed conflict. We could take that out of the list in terms of defining what is a serious violation of human rights. It has its own clause, as you've heard from Maya Braham. But all of those other norms, I think, clearly fall within the category of a serious violation of human rights law. I would perhaps add the caveat that aggression is clearly only a violation of human rights law where it involves some effect on individual human beings, such as the right to life. And on this last point, the UN Human Rights Committee has confirmed in paragraph 70 of its general comment on the right to life that states parties engaged in acts of aggression as defined in international law resulting in deprivation of life violate ipso facto Article 6 of the Covenant, in other words, the right to life. So a transfer of arms towards a state which could facilitate aggression where that aggression was going to lead to loss of life, that would be prohibited under the conditions that you all know under Article 7. So I've put sort of two what I might call easy categories on the table: crimes against humanity and jus cogens violations. But I don't think that's the end of the story. If we wanted to look a bit further as to what a serious violation of human rights might be at the international level and in the context of a treaty, I think it's worth looking as a comparator at the UN due diligence policy. This is, as you know, a policy which the UN has developed to ensure that it does not offer support to a military unit which has a poor record. And one of the criteria there are grave violations of human rights law. And I won't get into all of the detail, it's explained in para 7.57 of the chapter. But in terms of what they qualify as a gross violation of human rights in this context, when committed on a significant scale or with a significant degree of frequency, the list is summary executions and extrajudicial killings, torture, enforced disappearances, enslavement, and rape and sexual violence of a comparable serious nature. And I think that set of 5 human rights violations that the UN would be on the lookout for before offering support to a military unit is in a way comparable to the sorts of serious violation that would be relevant in terms of what should prohibit a transfer of arms. I think it's important to discuss perhaps, do you need several violations or a single violation? I would add, just for clarity, that the Arms Trade Treaty, as you know, talks about a serious violation of human rights and not serious violations. And therefore, I think one would have to take into account for those types of acts that I've referred to, rape and sexual violence or enslavement, it could indeed be a single act. So these are the rights that the UN would take into account in terms of vetting a security unit. But I don't think that's the whole story. I think that there could be a situation, for example, where arms were about to be transferred to a place where they were going to be used for the repression of demonstrations. And that repression of the demonstration could involve a violation of freedom of expression or freedom of assembly. And that could constitute a serious violation of human rights. So I think in the ordinary meaning of the expression, a serious violation of human rights, one would have to go beyond crimes against humanity, jus cogens, and the UN due diligence policy. And one would include, for example, the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, rights to freedom of assembly and expression, and potentially rights to health, education, food, and housing. So in summary, and I'm finishing here, I think that the word serious can denote the weight which international law gives to the type of human rights issue. This means taking into account the effect on the individual victims. So in this box, I would put the right to life, torture, sexual violence, enforced disappearance, and enslavement. They would all, in my view, count as automatically serious. And when it comes to human rights, such as freedom of assembly or the right to food, one might expect that the violations are considered, in the words of the NGO commission, the NGO submission at the time of the drafting of the Arms Trade Treaty, as part of a pattern or somehow persistent, occurring on a widespread or systematic basis. And I'd like to stop there and thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the question and answer session. Thank you, Ambassador.
Bien, pues sin mayor dilación, agradezco.
Thank you very much. And without much ado, I'd like to thank Professor Clapham. And I will offer now the floor to you in order for you to address your questions or comments to both our speakers. You can send your expression of interest through the chat. For the time being, apparently, there are no questions or comments.
No. Parece ser que.
Indeed. It seems as if Both our speakers have fully convinced all our members, as there are no questions on their side. Therefore, we will now refer to the report on exchange of best practices and listen to your declarations. I would like you to be as concise as possible because for the time being we have 11 speakers in our list and we are running out of time. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Facilitator. Let me first and foremost thank you for the preparation of this meeting. We also want to thank all those who participated in this exercise. In our view, this exercise was very useful and we are grateful that we could conduct this work. We also appreciate the expert presentations, which nicely demonstrate that these concepts are not entirely new and that a lot of work has already been put into the relevant terms and definitions. In that regard, while striving to achieve the greatest level of detail, such as in this exercise, it is important to ensure that our work does not put into question existing definitions of international law, for instance, those regarding international crimes. When looking at the definition of the voluntary guide, a way forward could be that the voluntary guide refers to other instruments that are already defined, that already define these concepts, so we can avoid to duplicate or even challenge these existing definitions. Thank you, Facilitator.
Muchas gracias, señor delegado de Suiza.
Thank you very much, Switzerland. And thank you especially for your statement, because it's true that the definitions relating to serious violations of human rights or international humanitarian law are concepts that have already been included in other instruments and which do not require a new definition or reformulation, but perhaps a case-by-case study on how to apply them. Ms. Molkova from the EU, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Ambassador. Mr. Chair, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The candidate countries Turkey, the Republic of North Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, and Albania, the country of the stabilization and association process, a potential candidate Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as the Republic of Moldova and Georgia aligned themselves with this statement. At the outset, we want to commend your work in steering the debates, which are important means for states parties to achieve transparency and build confidence in the faithful implementation of the treaty obligations. We thank you for holding this meeting, although the ongoing unfavorable situation doesn't allow us to meet in person. Our open and transparent discussions about implementation, including about challenges encountered in national decision-making processes and thoughtful implementation of assessment criteria, are of key significance for the strength of the treaty. I would like to also thank both presenters for the excellent presentation. The EU underlines the essential contribution that a responsible arms trade policy makes to the maintenance of international peace and security and respect for human rights and international humanitarian law. In accordance with the EU common position, which inter alia establishes 8 criteria against which applications for the export of conventional arms are to be assessed, we are therefore committed to promoting cooperation and convergence among EU member states' policies in order to prevent the export of military technology and equipment which might be used for internal repression or international aggression or contribute to regional instability. Following the review of the EU common position on arms exports in 2019, the EU and its member states are currently implementing several concrete initiatives as announced in the Council conclusions of 16 September 2019. A searchable online database is now available on the website of the European External Action Service that allows all stakeholders to consult and analyze the data on member states' arms exports in a user-friendly manner. The EU supports member states to collect and report relevant information on their actual exports. Finally, the EU is working on a database for licensing officers that would collect information on destination countries that could be relevant in the decision-making process. On 19 April 2021, the EU decided to provide new funding for the effective implementation of the Arms Trade Treaty. With a contribution of euro 1,037 million, the EU will finance 3 projects implemented by the ATT Secretariat in Geneva in order to strengthen treaty implementation and local expertise regarding the ATT. Concretely, the EU's support will enable the following actions: training local and regional ATT experts to deliver implementation assistance and reduce reliance on external consultants, creating a database to match treaty implementation needs and resources, and building IT and communication mechanisms to help states parties' points of contact and the ATT Secretariat collaborate more effectively. The project also strengthens the ATT Secretariat's institutional capacities to provide sustainable support to the states parties. The project is part of the EU's recently adopted broader strategy to strengthen the EU's contribution to rules-based multilateralism by promoting global peace and security. We look forward to intensifying the already close cooperation with the ATT Secretariat in the context of this new project. Although we are convinced that implementation is a national responsibility, any assistance that can be provided to states in this regard is both valuable and useful. In this context, let us recall that the EU will continue its ambitious. I believe there is again another microphone on. Sorry.
Marketa, you are muted.
Marketa, I think you have
Yes.
to
Yes.
unmute yourself.
I'm really sorry, I have not noticed. I apologize for that. So let me repeat, but I'm almost at the end of the statement. In this context, let us recall that the EU will continue its ambitious implementation project on the promotion of effective arms export controls implemented by BAFA and Expertise France. This project has been instrumental in advancing the implementation of the ATT outside the EU, in particular in the establishment of national control systems and national control lists, drafting and reviewing of the legislative and regulatory framework, prevention of diversion, and in the reinforcement of customs and law enforcement. Mr. Chair, in the end, let us underscore the importance that export control practitioners and experts attend and contribute to the discussions on implementation. With the hope to return to a normal business model soon, we are looking forward to welcoming to Geneva all representatives from capitals at the next conference of state parties. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and apologies for all the background noise.
Muchas gracias, Marketa, por...
Thank you, Marketa, for your presentation. Thank you to the European Union for the bilateral cooperation and for the support it gives to the Treaty Secretariat. France is the following delegation.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador and Mr. Moderator, and thank you also for the presentations made today, ICRC, with Professor Klapp, and also I'll be brief. France contributed to the work which you have carried out on Article 6 and 7 of the treaty. We recall our national practices based on an evaluation on a case-by-case basis following interministerial consideration. taking into account a number of factors, the context and circumstances in which the export is aimed, the final destination and final user and final usage, or the type and of equipment concerned. We've noted that many states have insisted in their contribution on the need of having a case-by-case approach of these concepts, where, as you've pointed out in your report, there is no single definition. This approach is in line with the letter and spirit of the treaty. France would also like to recall that tools have been developed to assist the states in the applications of Article 6 and 7. That is the common guide of the European Union, which was also alluded to in your report. This guide has recently been given to a reconsideration, taking into account the provisions of the treaty, and to which all European Union member states are party. France is prepared to continue to contribute actively to the work carried out within this subgroup, which is aimed at encouraging the exchange of information between state parties on the way in which they implement Articles 6 and 7 of the ATT. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you to the French delegation for your contributions to this debate. Women's International Leagues for Peace and Freedom.
Thank you for giving us the floor. The Women's International League for Peace and Freedom will focus its remarks on the summary report of the approaches to key concepts in Article 6 and 7 of the Arms Trade Treaty, which, as you all know, summarizes the findings of the unpacking exercise that the sub-working group on Article 6 and 7 agreed to undertake. As WILP has noted in the past, many of the concepts raised for discussion and interpretation in the working group's survey exercise are already well understood and employed within different fields of international law. And that's a subject that both of the presentation speakers today raised as well. We reiterate our earlier concerns that calling already settled terms under international law into question in the ATT process might undermine or contradict those well-settled understandings. We're also concerned about the significant time being given to this exercise over multiple years, while arms transfers of concern, which may violate these two treaty articles, often go unaddressed. Moreover, with only 20 states parties having participated and a few organizations, there's not a sufficient amount of information provided to meet the exercise's objectives. This calls into question both the validity and the purpose of the outcomes, noting as well the numerous disclaimers and caveats outlined in advance of the results. So again, we urge an end to this exercise in the interest of maintaining the integrity of international law. With all of those concerns in mind, WILP has drafted a point-by-point and in-depth response to the survey results published in the WGETI's preparatory documents. That longer form response can be found on the website of WILP's disarmament program, Reaching Critical Will, and is also annexed to this oral statement, which we've also provided in writing. But we will take this opportunity to provide two short examples, and these echo some of the points made during the earlier presentations. The survey asks states parties to how they understand the phrase serious violations of international humanitarian law. This question gets right to our primary concern about the exercise, that the exercise could undermine well-settled terms under international law. The ICRC, both today and in previous work, has conducted quite extensive work to clarify the technical definition of serious violations of IHL. And as Naya noted during her presentation, a serious violation of IHL is one which either endangers protected persons or objects, or one which breaches important values. In this exercise, however, states parties often discuss looking to the degree of harm to the victims of the violation, or looking at whether the violation is systematically repeated, or looking at the scale and the effects of the violation. These concepts clearly drive a colloquial understanding of seriousness, but these considerations do not form part of the legal definition of serious violations of IHL, and considering them when conducting this assessment might muddy the law on this point. So again, that gets to our primary concern about the exercise as a whole. A second example is that the survey asks states parties how they understand the phrase serious acts of gender-based violence. Understandings of gender-based violence, or GBV, are derived from a few overlapping and complementary authoritative sources under international law. And it is widely accepted at this point that all acts of gender-based violence are inherently serious. This is because GBV in all forms is a type of discrimination that seriously violates, impairs, or nullifies the enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Experts in both international human rights law and international humanitarian law have repeatedly reinforced this message and have clarified how these fields of law specifically work to prohibit gender-based violence. In this exercise, however, states parties often focused on the gravity of the relevant acts of gender-based violence and to the degree of harm to the victims of that violence. So again, this parallels the IHL question. Although the gravity of the acts and the degree of harm get at some instinctive sense of seriousness, they do not form part of the legal understanding of when GBV is serious. GBV is inherently serious in all its forms and permutations, and thus all acts of GBV must be considered to be serious. It's worth noting that the EU common position, which we've heard about today already, and which is repeatedly referenced in the survey results, itself doesn't make reference to gender-based violence, sexual violence, violence against women, or other related terms. And so while many states parties in responding to the survey indicated that they looked to the EU common position for guidance on this particular point, in reality, they must look beyond that common position for clearer guidance on those terms. Finally, our last point, when this exercise was first proposed, WILPF noted positively that the proposal to unpack key concepts such as facilitate, serious, and overriding corresponded neatly with paragraph 22C of the final report from the 5th Conference of States Parties and was intended to be in relation specifically to the GBV risk assessment process, with the widening of this exercise to include other concepts beyond the concepts related to the GBV risk assessment. WILPF would also like to refer to its submissions to this working group in both May and February of 2020, in which we offered suggestions as to how the other CSP5 commitments on gender and GBV prevention could be integrated and implemented in this and other working groups and sub-working groups. Thank you for giving us time and giving us the floor, and we appreciate the chance to make a statement.
Agradezco mucho al WILPA.
Thank you, WLPA, for your intervention and your commitment with this treaty and all your contributions to our reflections. I think throughout all the process that we've done and all the work in the drafting of the guide, these terms must not be questioned and are not questioned. Those concepts that are included in international humanitarian law or international human rights law. There is no law, no doubt about this established concept. The only thing we're looking at is how to apply them through the different elements of the Arms Trade Treaty. Belgium is the next in our list of speakers. Belgium, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Facilitator. We want to thank you for conducting this exercise in which we also participated, and also for making an effort to summarize the input that you received. We also want to thank the two presenters for their clear explanation, and I think that our Belgian input to the exercise was very much in line with those explanations. We obviously align ourselves also with the statement presented by the European Union, but just wanted to make one little remark in our national capacity. Taking into account the few states that provided input to the exercise and the difficulty to summarize and categorize approaches to these concepts, we do think that the summary should not be considered as an instrument for new states parties to identify options for approaching these concepts, even if it is purely informative and not prescriptive. In that regard, as several of these concepts have a well-established meaning in international law, it was said already by many of the previous speakers, we need to be careful that this exercise does not contribute to deviating from those well-established meanings in the specific context and the specific application of the ATT. Thank you, Mr. Facilitator.
Agradezco mucho.
Thank you to the Belgium delegate. Thank you for highlighting this issue on how we work on concepts that are well established in international law. Next delegation, Japan.
Ambassador.
Mr. Facilitator, thank you very much for giving me the floor. Japan would like to begin by expressing its sincere appreciation to Ambassador Sanchez, facilitator of this sub-working group on Article 6 and 7, for your leadership for and dedication to this sub-working group's activity. Japan recognized the vital importance of the working group on effective treaty implementation as a forum for discussion to promote and enhance the implementation of the ATT by each state parties. Regarding the work of the sub-working group, we would like to thank the facilitator for sharing the results of the exercise involving the methodology template in the summary report on the key concepts in Article 6 and 7 of the treaty. I will also express my deep appreciation to the facilitators for his painstaking efforts for drafting this important intellectual property. As it has expressed it on many occasions, Japan is of the view that care should be taken to avoid that the work of this body is construed as trying to establishing new norms. Because of this, we welcome the facilitator's clarification in his summary report that the report doesn't provide a recommendation or prescriptive definition of terms. We appreciate also the fact that facilitator's clarification reflects one of the principles enshrined in the treaty preamble. I quote, "The sovereign right of any state to regulate and control conventional arms exclusively," end quote. As previously expressed, we are afraid that while trying to unpack some of the key concepts of the treaty, which are not defined in the treaty itself, we would face inevitably issues of interpretation, which is not something that can be easily agreed upon by consensus. We are equally afraid that a written interpretation of such key concepts may have serious legal implications on interpretations of the other treaties. This can be said also to our work here. Japan is of the view that a careful consideration should continue to be given to the possible implications inadvertently arising from this endeavor to unpack these key concepts enshrined in the treaty on other international legal instruments. Japan appreciates today's opportunity to listen to the presentation provided by the two experts on the general interpretation of some of key concepts. Japan believes that it is meaningful for each state parties to benefit from the experts' viewpoints and advices to strengthen its implementation of the treaty in accordance with its proper domestic situation and law systems. Lastly, I would like to thank you, Ambassador Sanchez, the facilitator of this sub-working group, for preparing and organizing this very important session. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you to the Japanese ambassador for the support you've given to this exercise, and especially to my role of facilitator. You've always shown a very constructive you've always had a very constructive role. So now, Southeast Asia International, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Facilitator. I believe I was called, if I'm not mistaken, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak in this working group meeting. I will now deliver the statement on behalf of my organization, Nonviolence International Southeast Asia. We welcome the sub-working group's attention to mitigating and eliminating the risks of gender-based violence. It is important to highlight the extreme vulnerability of women and children in conflict situations, especially those displaced who are in dire need of humanitarian assistance at a time when international action is limited by the pandemic. This time of isolation makes it even more important for states to act and adopt strong risk assessments to prevent the transfer of illicit weapons that facilitate violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law. The national implementation of robust and comprehensive risk assessment and due diligence criteria by each state ensures that illicit transfers are not only prevented, but that future attempts to circumvent the system are anticipated and addressed. International cooperation, as many have said before me, especially regional cooperation, should be encouraged more to influence and persuade countries to standardize risk assessment mechanisms, especially within this distinct context of each region. Regional action is especially important because insecurity and conflict in one country undoubtedly has negative effects in the security and stability of other countries. Some attention should also be given not just on laws and policies, which by themselves constitute an important legal framework, but also in promoting presently informal processes that can be turned into formal best practices. Many developing countries, especially in South and Southeast Asia, have commendable laws, but lack the capacity, especially in these trying times, to implement them. Thus, where capacity and resources are lacking, some semi-formal or informal practices have emerged that may serve as best practice examples. To this extent, providing support for local civil society organizations that work closely with governments to address gaps in implementation is vital, as it helps not only in this area, but also in keeping states accountable and cognizant of their treaty obligations. Finally, Nonviolence International Southeast Asia wishes to call attention to the disparate effects of the pandemic, especially on developing and conflict-affected countries, where internal instability and conflict have been magnified tenfold. It would be of great assistance to these countries to examine the extent that the pandemic has put on hold or set back some great strides made in this area of risk assessment and prohibitions in the past few years as a result of not being able to cope with this global health crisis. Thank you once again, Mr. Facilitator.
Muchas gracias por su apoyo al.
Thank you for your support to the convention, and especially for claiming the role of social CSOs, which are so important to implement the treaty. Control Arms, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. In the interest of time, I will keep my statement short, and a longer version will be submitted to the ATT Secretariat in writing. Control Arms is pleased to the multi-year work plan was ultimately adopted by ATT states parties in March of this year, providing us the opportunity to move forward toward achieving effective and consistent implementation of Articles 6 and 7 by all ATT states parties. We also extend our thanks to the ICRC and Professor Andrew Clapham for their informative and insightful presentations that provide firm ground for this discussion. Contra Arms supports efforts to develop common understandings of concepts and terms that may be ambiguous or open to interpretation, such as facilitate, overriding risk, and knowledge at the time of authorization, as these have either none or several definitions or interpretations in international law. Considering the term facilitate, for example, we note the range of these initial responses may prove a useful start point for further discussion, and certain explanations we see as clearly helpful in taking the issue forward, such as the response from 4 states parties that consider whether the weapons to be transferred make a violation easier to commit, including through intimidation. Other responses submitted here would benefit from further elaboration. For instance, 8 states parties consider the EU Council Common Position 2008/944 CFSP in their interpretation and application of the term facilitation. However, as the EU Common Position makes no mention of facilitation, without further reference, it is unclear what function the Common Position serves here. Contra Arms also welcomes states parties' interpretation of serious acts of gender-based violence and serious acts of violence against women and children, as it used in an international legal instrument of this kind is a novel one, and as such draws your attention to existing resources produced by international and civil society organizations, some of which you will find listed in our written statement. On the other hand, ContraArms is wary of applying this unpacking process to concepts that are already well established and understood in international law. Established legal terms and definitions, where they exist, as outlined so very clearly by the ICRC and Professor Clapton in this session, must be observed by all states parties in the implementation of the ATT. Opening up the definition or interpretation of terms that are already determined, codified, or commonly used risks weakening existing international legal norms. Existing law, whether codified or customary, cannot be disregarded. We're also concerned with the proposal to close the methodology template exercise when only 20 states parties, 18% of the total, have responded to date. This cannot be a high enough response rate to move to the next stage in the process. This is exacerbated by the fact that, as we have today heard, which of the 20 states parties have contributed, we can now see that the responses are uneven with regard to geography as well as role in the international arms trade. ContraArms urges the sub-working group to extend the time frame of the current exercise until more states parties and a more representative range of states parties are able to contribute. ContraArms thanks Ambassador Sanchez for listing those stakeholders in his introductory presentation. In addition to the list of participants, public disclosure of the full responses of their resources is important. This will enable states parties and civil society to encourage further engagement in these important discussions and will signal a critical and valuable shift back towards the ATT's stated purpose to promote transparency. As the focal point for the implementation of Articles 6 and 7, ContraArms urges this sub-working group to engage in open and constructive discussion concerning treaty compliance, both its successes and challenges. Including concrete examples of risk assessments will allow this sub-working group to contribute not only to policy development, but to practical development of the highest possible common international standards for regulating or improving the regulation of the international trade in conventional arms. Thank you for your attention.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very, very much to the delegate of Control Arts. I'd like to make clear that the common position of the EU that was mentioned explicitly, the concept facilitate. I need to make clear that when you read the report, the countries that have mentioned the common position of the EU have done it from a global perspective. They've said it's one of the instruments they use for the process of implementing the treaty, and that is for all the concepts that we are examining or reviewing, not from a specific reading of each one of the concepts. So I wanted just to make clear that this common position of the EU is an instrument, a tool that state parties use in their global comprehensive interpretation of the whole process of the treaty. About extending the timetable for this process, I must say I'm skeptical because we've extended the timetable 3 times and we haven't gotten any further. Countries who have been invited to participate have had 1 year, although this exercise was designed to last only 3 months. So I'm afraid if we extend the timetable, we won't have more contributions. I would have liked to have more time to work, but we need to work with what we have. So, lastly, about the transparency exercise, I think the information on state parties is contained in their national reports, and those state parties that reveal them to the public, I say, contribute to transparency best. And now I'd like to give the floor to Canada.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Le Canada souhaite.
Thank you. We would like to support the chairman from Korea who's done a great job here. We would like to thank the facilitator of the subgroup on Articles 6 and 7, Ambassador Sanchez from Spain. Mr. Facilitator, we are very happy to be able to discuss the results of the work of the subgroup on Articles 6 and 7 of the treaty. We are very happy with the progress that has been made. We would also like to thank the presenters for their presentations on serious violations of international human rights law and serious violations of international humanitarian law. We have participated in the exercise on these concepts and we have sent the result of our work to the Secretariat. We would like to thank all of the organizations that have contributed to this effort. Canada took part in this effort because we believe that it is very important to develop resources to make possible the implementation of the treaty. The way in which certain states parties implement the treaty is something that can be helpful for other states parties depending on the national context. As regards the legislative amendments that had to be made for the implementation of our own obligations under the treaty in Canada, we had to look at the way risks were mitigated at the national level in other states parties. Overriding risk is not a term that is used in Canadian legislation and is very difficult to translate into French. So we have examined the various possibilities. In New Zealand, the term substantial risk is used, and in Canada this is translated in French as risque sérieux. This is a term that is also used widely by civil society. In Canadian legislation, other concepts are used, including the serious risk. What is very important is to realize that there are various approaches that can be entertained when implementing the treaty in various ways in which the obligations can be ensured. This is a very useful exercise to help new states parties to set up their national regimes and control systems, especially as regards the implementation of Articles 6 and 7 of the treaty. Thank you, Mr. Facilitator.
Gracias, Canadá, por su intervención. Doy la palabra a la delegación de la República.
Thank you very much, Canada. The Korean Republic has the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. As this is the first time that I take the floor, and it has been a year since we had the last interactive working group discussion, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to Ambassador Djibari, Ambassador Rim, and Ambassador Sanchez, and the Secretariat for their devotion to organize this meeting. We welcome the facilitator's summary report of the responses to the methodology template for unpacking key concepts. We believe that this exercise can lead to an identification of some common approaches state parties take to the interpretation and application of these concepts, which in turn could serve as a guidance for state parties that are in the process of establishing their export control system in accordance with their ATT commitments. The Republic of Korea also submitted its response to the call for inputs in the methodology template last year, and we hope that we can contribute to this meaningful exercise. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Korea, for your kind words of support and for participating in this exercise. The State of Palestine has the floor.
السيد الرئيس Mr. President, the State of Palestine would like to thank you for all the efforts that you have made today in order to conduct our affairs optimally. We also thank all the presenters. Regarding the method of unpacking key concepts of Articles 6 and 7, we believe that the in good faith is the concept that should be paramount in understanding the objectives of the treaty in keeping with the Article 31 of the Convention of Treaties in Vienna. As the concept of the ATT in accordance with Article 1 is to endorse peace and security regionally and internationally, as well as to encourage humanitarian behaviors and to limit human suffering. The State of Palestine affirms that the humanitarian application of the convention will put an end to the gross violations of human rights and IHL, as well as the respect of Article 1 of Geneva Conventions of 49 is a basic tenet of the treaty. We believe that understanding and interpreting the articles of the ATT is of paramount importance because it will allow us or help us to realize the universality of the treaty. This is a legal approach, not a political approach. We believe that there is a great gap in the interpretation of these provisions between the jus cogens internationally in the international laws or in customary law. That's why we believe that all national legislations must be brought into line with the provisions of the human rights law and IHL and ATT, and not the opposite. I believe we should not use national laws to justify the great gap and difference in application. And the recent pandemic of corona has proven that we need to review our understanding of security. This means we cannot continue to spend billions and trillions on arms. We have to concentrate on education and health services. Spending billions on militarization made our world more susceptible to face these crises. We believe continuing these arm trading with countries that have a long list and history in committing atrocities. Hence, Palestine expresses its concern that many exporters of arms do not take this history in consideration. We believe our ATT must work towards international peace and security and the peaceful solution of conflict, as well as taking into consideration the record of the importing countries. And we should also realize that arms trade if it violates the provisions of IHL and human rights, it's considered a crime that would lead to crime against humanity. And countries that allow the commission of such crimes must review their laws. Thank you, sir.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to the State of Palestine for your statement. Good faith is indispensable in the efficient implementation of the ATT, as well as in the national interpretations we make of these legal concepts. Obviously, we would like for all exporters to adhere to our treaty. In that sense, we still have margin to advance in the universalization of the treaty. Shukran. And the following speaker will be Ireland.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we do.
Wonderful.
Yes, we do. Go ahead. Seems we lost you now. Come back. Seems we have had a problem, a momentary problem after hearing very well the Irish delegation, so we will move to the next one and we will get back to Ireland later. Delegation of China, you have the floor. Okay, we have Ireland with us now. Okay, let's try again with Ireland, but now we were seeing you but not hearing you. Now, try again, or we move on to China. Please, delegation of China, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Just now, different delegations mentioned some concepts. The interpreter apologizes. The connection is not very well. China is studying these questions seriously right now. China would like to stress that the common position of the EU is not an international law in which every country participated and recognized. And now I would like to express China's view on the Article 6 and 7. The illicit transfers and abusive uses of conventional arms, and especially SALW, have caused regional instability and constitute a serious challenge to the international humanitarian law, in particular in some armed conflict regions. The rights of women and children have been gravely breached. China supports the regulation of international arms trade by the treaty and the fight against illicit transfers and diversion of arms to alleviate the humanitarian issues. China has always adopted a prudent and responsible attitude towards arms trade at the legislative level. China has issued and implemented the law on the administration of firearms, the regulation on the administration of military products exports, and its annexed control lists and other laws and regulations, which have the purpose of regulating rigorously and effectively all the military products. On the 1st of December 2020, the law on export control of the People's Republic of China was officially implemented, which covers the control of exports of conventional arms products. This has provided a strong legal safeguard to the enhancement of arms trade management. From the policy perspective, our export of military products adheres strictly to three principles, which are to facilitate the legitimate defense of the recipient country, to be non-detrimental to country, regional, or global peace and stability, and not to interfere in the internal affairs of the recipient countries. After joining the treaty, China has also been conducting export assessments against the criteria of the treaty in its authorization process. It is worth mentioning that China only sells arms to sovereign states or legitimate departments or companies authorized by governments. We have never sold arms to non-state actors. China believes that the prohibition of arms transfer to non-state actors can considerably reduce regional conflicts and humanitarian disasters. We would like to call on all states to adopt similar approaches. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a la delegación de China por su intervención y le...
Thank you to the delegation from China. With respect to the common position of the EU Council, which indeed is not an international piece of law, only EU members have contributed to developing that common position. Nonetheless, many other states use this common position as a reference text. They do not provide it with any legal significance, but they use it as an instrument when they carry out their assessments, as it includes reference to other instruments and lots of content which can be very valuable when carrying out those export assessments. Ireland, we had left you pending. Let's try again. You have the floor.
Many thanks, Mr. Facilitator. Thank you for giving me the floor, and sincere apologies for the technical difficulties. I think we're all susceptible to these gremlins, so appreciate your patience. I'd like to align Ireland with the statement made by the EU and offer the following remarks in my national capacity. First of all, let me thank you very much for your able chairmanship of the sub-working group and for your work on articulating the relevant key concepts of Articles 6 and 7 and for commencing the voluntary guide to implementing those articles. We're very pleased to be able to discuss these topics and have an exchange of views on these very important matters. Mr. Chair, in light of the very limited time for our discussion, I will keep my comments quite brief. First of all, Ireland places a high value on information sharing and exchange within the ATT. We would like to thank Ms. Brame and Professor Clapham for their contribution to furthering our thinking on serious violations. Ireland was pleased to be able to contribute our views on the key concepts of Articles 6 and 7, which we see reflected in the summary report on approaches to key concepts in Articles 6 and 7. We appreciate the efforts made by other states parties who also submitted responses. We would urge states who are unable to provide responses within the allocated timeframe to assist with refining the methodology by providing input wherever possible into the development of Chapter 1 of the proposed voluntary guide. Second, we appreciate the work you have done to develop the list of possible reference documents, including guidance relating to the implementation of Article 7.4 on gender-based violence. We propose the inclusion of Stimson's new paper on gender on the ATT, supported by Ireland, which is a practical approach to the implementation of gender-based violence risk assessments by states. The paper provides a concrete risk assessment questionnaire, which can be used by licensing officials when conducting risk assessments. It is imperative that this gender dimension be integrated into all export assessments and remains a central theme to our work this week and at the upcoming CSP. I'll leave it there, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to continuing the discussion and would like to reaffirm our support for the development of the voluntary guide. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a Irlanda.
Thank you very much, Ireland. These days, we're all very familiar with technical hiccups. I myself was having some issues turning on the microphone. I'd like to thank Ireland for their support, for their kind words, and for their positive and constructive attitude. We don't have any other speakers on our list for today's session, so I'd like to thank, to finalize, all delegations for their participation, for their constructive attitude, and for making this happen despite the delay with which we started. We will be wrapping up on time. I'd also especially like to thank the Secretariat and the technical team. Without their dedication and effort, it would have not been possible to meet today in this format. At least for me, they're indispensable. This has been a difficult challenge. This exercise has taken us to better understand how we are working on this matter at a national level. There is still a lot to improve on, and we will have to continue working on the voluntary guide for Article 6 and 7. I presume that in the coming months or years, we will be able to delve deeper into the different ideas that have been brought up in this exercise, and we will hopefully be able to confirm that there are a series of international concepts that no one challenges, and that what we want is for them to be effectively implemented at a national level. Therefore, I would encourage you to continue working in such a constructive manner, and we will see each other again in the following session when we will take up the matter on the voluntary guide. Before concluding and before turning off our screens, I'd like to give the floor over to the Secretariat so that they can update us on different household matters for the following days.
Thank you, Ambassador, for giving me the opportunity to make the final announcements for today. Firstly, we are happy that we have reached the end of today's proceedings, and we have done so with less major interruptions coming from our connectivity. We appreciate that we've been able to have some lively exchange between the facilitators as well as participants. We thank you then very much for your participation today, as well as the facilitators for getting us to this point. Before we conclude the proceedings of today, therefore, I would wish to make the following announcements. Some will be applicable for today and some for the following day, which is tomorrow. As previously announced, we have site events that have been organized to complement the work of these meetings, and they will run from today until Thursday. We have them on the website. They are clearly indicated on the website, but for today, starting at 15:3 Geneva time, right up to 16:45 Geneva time, we will have a site event with the title, A Comprehensive Approach to Prevent and Mitigate Risk of Diversion. This site event is organized by Stimson Center and Conflict Armament Research, the Small Arms Survey, as well as UNIDER. The link to connect to the site event is available on the website. If you click on that link, therefore, it lets you into the site event. Regarding this, the speakers list for tomorrow, we would like to invite participants to indicate their wish to take the floor tomorrow, and they can do so until 1800 today, Geneva time. So there's basically about 3 hours between now and the date by which we will close for speakers for tomorrow for publication. As I indicated in the beginning of this session, in the morning then tomorrow we will publish the list of speakers who have inscribed to speak. However, those who would want to take the platform who have not yet inscribed for the speakers list, they can use the chat function to request for the floor. But if you request to take a platform tomorrow or the floor tomorrow, you send us an email. And our email address, I think it's commonly known. It's info@thearmstradetreaty.org. as you send the email requesting to speak tomorrow, it's important for you to indicate the item under which you would want to speak. That makes it easy for us to facilitate the discussions tomorrow. And finally, we request participants that tomorrow when you join the meeting using the link that was circulated today, you do so in good time. We open up for accessing the meeting from 10:30 a.m. Geneva time. And the reason behind this is we want to prevent a congestion that normally happens some few minutes before 12 o'clock. So it helps us to process participants in good time. So we would request you to join the meeting earlier so that we can be able to manage the inflow. But in the identity that you use for the Zoom, we have seen here delegates use different names, but I think it helps a lot if you indicate your name and the name of the state organization that you speak on behalf of. Because if it's just a name only, we do not know what state organization you represent. So it helps to have that identity cleared up. So tomorrow we'll be proceeding to the next set of sessions, starting tomorrow morning at 12 o'clock tomorrow, starting with Article 9, and thereafter proceeding to discussing matters related to the working group on treaty universalization. So these are the announcements I wanted to make at this hour before we close the proceedings of today. Without much ado, I hand over then to Ambassador Sanchez to close the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ladla. Thank you very much for your participation, and we continue working tomorrow. Bye.